and his satanic assistant, Alex Houdini, both of whom can't go into churches without vomiting.
And welcome to Nocturnal Frequency Radio for another Sunday evening here on New Visions Radio Network, and of course simulcasting on our YouTube channel and Twitch, formerly Twitch.
Formerly Twitch.
Formerly Twitch. Welcome, Chris. Tonight, by the way, we have Mr. Christopher Balzano, and it's been a long time. I'm trying to remember the last time you were on.
I don't know, but I guess I need no introduction. You're just going to go right in. I'm glad you're that comfortable with me.
No, it's always we always enjoy having you on the show. I mean, the last couple of times we've had you on, of course, I think the first time you were still situated in Mass, right? And we had John. Yeah, you were talking. You came on to talk about the Bridgewater Triangle and the book that you wrote on it, and the good old puckwudgies.
Yeah, I was just having a puckwudgie conversation less than an hour ago about something kind of local that fits into it, and I'm like, wait a minute, I've heard a story a while ago, and so all these things are clicking in. It's weird what you become. Known for things, it's those Bridgewater Triangle books are now. So I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher, and every year around this time of the year for a project we're working on, I teach my students how to evaluate fine literature by exposing them to not fine literature, my books. And so after a year of, after 6 or 7 months of me tearing apart what they do all the time, they get to read all of my negative reviews. And so this year I made a little presentation, and I'm saying, like, we had them all up, and they got to they got to get their laughs in about how bad some of the reviews are and how much people hate me out there. And in that I'm looking at the dates, and I'm realizing that some of those reviews for the Bridgewater Triangle books are older than the kids that are sitting in the room.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, wow, I still can't believe I'm being asked questions about, the redheaded hitchhiker or stuff like that. So
how does something like the Bridgewater Triangle and, everything that's in, because I mean, there's so much that is going on there or has gone on there.
Historically, right? Yeah,
historically. And I mean, how does it translate into, say, where you are now, Florida? Because I mean, there's a lot of weirdness in Florida.
Yeah. So, I've been asked by different production companies that want to do triangle specials, and there was one show, I don't know if I'm breaking a 3 or 4 year old non-disclosure agreement by this, but they wanted to do a TV show that was all just triangles, right? Really? And so keeping in mind that I focus primarily now on haunted legends, right? And so the stories, what these hauntings say about the living more than the dead. Mm-hmm. And triangles, I think, are our brain's natural way to try to understand this stuff, right? Okay. Like if you have one place that's really haunted, it's really haunted. If you have two places that are haunted, you can always connect a line between any two places, right? If you have a third place and now you start to get there's weird stuff within it, now it becomes real, right? Now it becomes something that you can actually pinpoint and you can say, and it has some kind of some weird factual presence and resonance, because it's within this area things happen, and so I see a lot of, we have the Tampa Triangle down here, and I throw it out there, especially if I'm in that area doing presentations or doing whatever. But it's really, I think we strive to have a triangle, right? Triangles will help us make sense of this thing that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Having said that, I've not found a triangle type area here in Florida that even competes with it.
Really?
I mean, we have the OSCALA National Forest, which is the book my most recent book, that rivals anything in the Bridgewater Triangle in this one area of Florida.
Okay, yeah.
But nothing like a triangle which, spans multiple towns and has, over the years, people have tried to be like, oh, well, this is a triangle, this is a triangle. And it's you don't understand that inside the Bridgewater Triangle, there's a very particular kind of haunting. And most of the weird stuff that happens there has no backstory. So it kills me as a folklorist, right? Like, you hear this.
What am I supposed to write about? No.
Yeah, it's just there's a darkness there that isn't in other places. So yeah, you can have other places that are haunted, or you can have like triangular things going on, but it's the nature of the Bridgewater Triangle hauntings and their connection to things like mental health disorder, teen suicide, divorce rates, like all this other stuff that makes it that added like little spice of weirdness.
I mean, and we're talking about what is that? Was the Lizzie Borden house? Is it?
The
Lizzie Borden house, and everything from mob kills to UFOs to Bigfoot to all sorts of weird,
to zombies to, and it's one of those things where you take all that in, and then you take the Bridgewater State Prison, which is notorious, the suicide rate amongst inmates of the Bridgewater State Hospital, I should say, not the prison, but the hospital, is like 10 times what it is in any other mental health facility in the country. Wow. 24, which is the backbone. I call it the backbone of the triangle. It kind of runs through it. As a person driving around Boston and driving to places, you would hear 24 every day, 24, fatal accident on 24, fatal accident on 24. And so, it's not just that. It's not just the ghosty stuff and the paranormal stuff. There seems to be a weird energy there. The number of serial killers in that one little area is baffling.
So, I mean, how long has it been like the coining of this triangle? Like who deciphered oh my God, this is the shape of this triangle.
Cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman.
Oh, that's right. Right.
Yeah. He was looking into, I think originally it was UFO sightings. And Bridgewater is broken up into Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, and East Bridgewater. And so they formed a triangle because there were 3 towns. And as he started to kind of expand weirdness, now keeping in mind that he's not a ghost person, and he's very hard-lined with some stuff, he began to stretch it out and out and out to different towns until he kind of reached where the weirdness stopped for him at that time. And so it formed at Abington, Freetown, and then Rehoboth, each of which are unique in their own right, and then the towns that were in there. Over the years, and him and I have had conversations about this, and he's been public, it's kind of nebulous, right? Like we call it the Bridgewater Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle was really hot at that time, so he was kind of to some degree, piggybacking that, but really it's not a triangle at all. Right, it's all of this other weird stuff that's going on. It stretches out into other towns. It has to go to Plymouth, man. Like Plymouth Rock we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The ghosts landed on us, or I don't know, something about that. But it's it's kind of expanded over the years because, like, technically, for example, Fall River is not in Lauren Coleman's triangle.
Okay.
However, the town of Freetown used to include Fall River. Right.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So how can you not include Lizzie Borden, the most famous haunting in Massachusetts?
Yeah.
The weirdest places.
Yeah.
The weirdest haunted buildings in that as well. So I think and then from there, it really laid dormant for, he started talking about it in the late 70s. Mysterious America is the first one to kind of have it published, like the first book to talk about his Mysterious America. And then it kind of laid dormant. And, for me, it was more of, I kept getting story after story after haunting, after legend, after personal experience, all in the same part of Massachusetts, I'm about to say Florida, of Massachusetts. Didn't know what the Bridgewater Triangle was, had never heard of it. In the early days, I thought Lauren Coleman was a girl. I was a bigger fan of his brother's writing, and so the first time I talked to him, it was a little bit awkward. And then I found the research of someone who actually was a friend of mine who I worked with, and he's like, this is the Bridgewater Triangle. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so that's the proof to me that it is weird. I was continuously being called out to that area, and then I learned that there was a thing about it.
So what kind of personal experiences have you had there?
I got a tick in my belly button once. Does that count?
Well, hopefully you didn't get Lyme's disease.
I have a mortal fear of ticks, by the way.
Yeah. Okay.
My very first, I do it now, is called legend tripping, right?
Yeah.
So it's about experience over evidence. It's about going out, and everyone in town says that this thing happens in this location.
Mm-hmm.
And so on Halloween 1998, we went out to Legend Trip. We didn't call it that. We didn't call it investigate or anything. We just went out to experience all of these stories in a town called Rehoboth, which is one of the apexes.
Okay.
And we went to several different locations that are kind of mentioned in this one book called New England Ghost Files. And probably the most insane thing that we had that day was we were in one location called the Shade Factory Pond. Shade Factory. It's a shade pond factory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fire that happened, and all these people died in the fire, and people have had this kind of time slip where they see the fire going on.
Oh, wow.
And so we were there, and we just had this like intense feeling of heat in October in Massachusetts, right? So it's not really. And then all of a sudden we started having our legs pulled. And actually like as if something was trying to come up out of the ground and grab us, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That was probably one of the most visceral ones that we had because we were inexperienced and we were just kind of, but since then, that first night, I mean, I've gotten, tons of experience at a place called Anawan Rock.
Okay.
Which is one of like the real like superstars of the Bridgewater Triangle.
Okay.
You cannot go there at night without seeing ghost fires.
Ghost fires.
Without having whispering in your ears. It seems as if you want to teach someone how to get an EVP, you take them to Anawan Rock.
Yeah.
And analyze it afterwards because it's just such an active location. So I know I've been on there and been on the top of Anawan Rock and had someone, physically try to like push me off of the rock itself. And then of course, anyone who wants to afterwards can simply Google when Pukwudgies attack. And you'll find this really crazy when we were filming the video because they wanted a DVD. It was an instructional book called Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting.
Okay.
And so they wanted me to like video different people doing what they do. So you could get a hint of like how different groups work.
Yeah.
And so we went out to the Sonnet Ledge, which to me is the most haunted location in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And as we were finishing setting up, and the video speaks for itself, so people have to kind of Google it.
So when Pukwudgies attack.
When Pukwudgies attack, yeah.
Okay.
And so we were setting up, and the people I was with, they were interesting because they were a science-based group.
Mm-hmm.
They had thermal imaging before anyone else did because one of their people was the head of the fire department. Okay. And so he had the old school like ones that the firefighters use, right?
Oh yeah.
Infrared, heat looking for that. And so I wanted to do that because they were very science-based, and yet they also had a medium with them. And the medium went everywhere with them.
Yeah.
And so we're at the Sonnet Ledge. We're in the lower part, and we're closing up, right? So we're setting the camera that's filming for the DVD is, they're packing up, and I just all of a sudden, like all the air just came out of me.
Oh wow! And
I went, something's different. I said, and I look up at the medium who I'd worked with before, and I'm like, Andy, come back, and I'm like, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? And I look up at her, and all the color comes out of her face, and her eyes kind of roll back. And she then goes on this tirade of what seems to be like being possessed by something.
Oh, wow.
And over the years, people have torn apart the video. It's presented as it was filmed. So happened, didn't happen. That's for you to evaluate. However, what you don't see on the video is after this whole thing, I start to film kind of the guy's reaction to it. And as we're doing that, there's people at the top of the Sonnet Ledge who are partying. Excuse me. They hear her screaming and everything. And they start swearing down at us, Yeah. And so the people who I'm with start swearing up at them, right? So like there's this whole, which is why it's never like that part's not like a part of the video, is that they're just swearing back and forth to each other. But in the woods, you just all of a sudden start to see these ghost lights, which are part of the not only the Sonnet Ledge lore, but also Pukwudgie lore. Yeah. You start to see all these balls of light just kind of lighting up in the woods, and there's no cars. You can't, there's only one place you can get through there by car. This is kind of like popping off in the woods and then like going back and disappearing. So I've had like those types of experiences in the Triangle. So
That's insane. So now, yeah, you're situated down in Florida. You're doing legend tripping.
I like the way you say it's situated. I'm not from Florida. I'm situated in Florida.
Let's be honest here. Who is from Florida? I mean,
Where
Florida
I live in Florida, I live in some place where no one is from here.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
we usually go down to Florida pretty much every year, and around the St. Pete's area.
Yeah.
And literally, you talk to everybody there. It's like, oh yeah, I'm from the West Coast. I'm from over here. I'm from Germany. What? Germany?
Yeah. Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, a third of my town is owned by Germans, and a third of the town is owned by Canadians.
Yeah. Oh no.
And that's not an exaggeration. And then a third of, and then everyone else is renting from them. So yeah, it's one of the things I talked about when I first got here is that. Ghostly lore needs to be generational, right?
Yeah.
Like I heard from this generation that something was going on, or it's been told for these different generations for a certain amount of time. And you don't have that in a lot of the coastal towns in Florida because there is such an exchange, an influx, outflux, right?
Yeah.
But once you get past the coast and you start getting into what I call Central Florida. So for me, Central Florida is not Orlando. It's not this. It's this. Right?
Yeah.
Once you get into all of those really, really weird towns in Florida that have been 5-6 generations in that area, right? That's when you start to hear that there's a lot of different ghost stories being told.
I mean, I really, again, like I said, I've been to Florida several times over the years, and I really it's sparse. I mean, I know of certain areas, like for instance the St. Augustine Lighthouse.
Yeah,
I mean that's a popular one, but I mean other than that, I'm like, okay, what else is there?
Well,
and
next time you go to St. Pete, I have about 7 different legends.
I wouldn't doubt it
in St. Pete, and St. Pete and Tampa seem to be the outlier. That area happens to have a lot, and a lot of it has to do with there's some really smart brains that are in that area that have kind of kept this lore and have do a really good job as folklorists bringing stories to the forefront. And those are also probably they're Miami. It's really closed off. Like it's a community in and of itself. St. Pete, Tampa. There's a place called Safety Harbor. That's one of my favorite ghost stories there.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the kinds of places that have history to them and a lot of people documenting that history. And so there's a ton in that area. So
now, like, okay, you've written books. You've written several books now being down there. You have your podcast. And the podcast is somewhat what? An extension of
my brain,
your brain, but teaching people about these legends, like how
it's it began with let's legend trip and document what we're doing. That was kind of the original course of action.
Yeah.
About 3 years in, I lost my co-host, and kind of she was like the to a lot of ways the heart of that aspect of things. And then it became, well, what am I going to do now? And so a lot of what we do now is we still have the same kind of spirit of like, all right, let me tell you about this haunted legend. And then eventually we go out and explore it. And then we come back with it. So we teach you the history of it. We teach you what people are saying about it. We talk about where the historical or reality-based things are kind of anchored in it. And then we go out and experience it as people tell the legend, right? So if someone says you have to go to a bridge and try to sell your soul to get a wife, to get a love potion, we make it, you know what I'm saying? We go there with a love potion and we don't try to sell our soul.
Yeah.
But it's expanded to, especially for a while, I like to bring my daughter in. And my daughter brings a different perspective on, she just turned 14, on digital legend trends.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
And so, so what we tend to do on the show is we tend to have 1/3 of them now are digital legends or things that like the kids are saying, which is the most interesting aspect of the paranormal going on right now. Like the way the legends are being spread through things like TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat.
Yeah.
And then 1/3 are probably just me going off like, hey, here's a haunted theme that I've been exploring. And then 1/3 are actual haunted legends in Florida that we either go to or plan to go to.
What has there been something now that you find yourself returning to over and over and over? Like, I mean, you just can't get enough of it.
Yeah. It's the themes, right? Like the themes blowing you away. Yeah. Like, and the idea of that is like what today on the 14th of May is the thing that I'm obsessed with because they go in cycles. That's how Haunted Love got written, is that we just realized a ton of our legend trips had to do with Haunted Love. And we jokingly were going, hey, #Haunted Love.
Yeah.
And then there were just happened to be like a huge trend in the legends I was finding that were Native American based.
Okay.
And then of course, like for 2 years, my life was the OSCALA and all that stuff. And now it seems to be like ghosts without heads and without body parts.
Ghosts without
heads.
Like
I've just been getting a lot of, submissions kind of from people, but then also just tapping upon these stories of headless ghosts, and they roll into each other, and it's like, okay, all right, that's where I'm supposed to be looking right now. So the trends kind of find themselves. So
hold on a sec. They roll into themselves.
The stories roll into themselves. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. I was gonna say the heads roll into themselves.
No, well, that would be really cool. That's
yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. Have you ever heard like a really good like headless ghost story where it's just the head? No, it's always like the body looking for the head, and like and it's not like it's ever like right over there.
I mean, it's the classic, obviously, is like Sleepy Hollow, right?
Sleepy Hollow, right? So, and that's the kind of thing we do. It's like you have to realize, okay, we're all living in the shadow of certain big ghost stories, right?
Yeah.
And so when you hear like a haunted head, a headless legend, you have to say, how much of this is Washington Irving and how much of this is Florida? And so I always say, like, when paranormal happens to us, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't know what it is because it's paranormal. It's not what normally happens to us. We have to process it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the triangle thing I was talking about earlier. We have to process it. And so what do we use to process it but stories that we know?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why when we see this specter and it seems to not have a head, or there's a legend of someone who lost their head nearby and there's also a ghost, everything makes sense because like, oh, I know that story. That's if it was there, it had to be a thing. And what they don't realize is that like, well, that was just kind of a story, but that's the kind of thing that fuels this. It's not that the ghost is real or not real. It's the prism or the viewer that people are using to process it is made up of urban legends that they know and ghost stories they've heard and tales of yore. And that's kind of where I live and what I love.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that you said important. I think is kind of void now. When we were kids, we had all these amazing tales and legends and hauntings and stuff like that. I don't know. It seems like those days are gone, and it just. Well, I don't want to say gone, but they don't seem to be as grand as they used to be.
They've shifted.
Yeah, they shifted.
They've shifted. Yeah. Now, here's the one thing I'll agree with you on one handle because I've been obsessed with this lately. You asked what I'm obsessed with.
Yeah. It's
the death of the rock and roll legend, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
When was the last time you heard a really good modern, like weird, like about music, right? Like, whereas we have like decades of really cool Selling Your Soul at the Crossroads and
yeah.
You know what I'm saying, like making deals with the devil to get big and is Paul dead and like all these great things that like our Gary Patterson used to write about. And now there's none of that, right? Like there's no mystique to Taylor Swift whatsoever because it's all right out there, right? Ghostly Legends, it's not the same thing, man. They are alive and well.
Okay.
I remember a few years ago talking to my daughter, who had to have been maybe 9 at the time. And she comes up to me and she asks me, my 9-year-old daughter, asks me to set my alarm for 2:45 and wake her up. And I'm like, what the? I'm like, no. What's it? She's like, I have to get up at 3 to do the 3 o'clock challenge.
Okay.
and I was like, well, what's that? And she said, I have to wake up at 3, and then I've got to turn off all the lights, and I've got to look at the candle, and I've got to pop up whatever it was. And I was like, no, shut up, go to bed. No, you know it. Actually, I think I said, yeah, I'll wake you up, whatever.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately, like the same kind of time, there was buzz in my classroom, which at that time was 7th graders, and they were talking about Bloody Mary.
Oh, God, yeah.
And I introduced that. And every year I talk about Bloody Mary, and every year I offer an extra credit to anyone that will go into the bathroom of the school and do Bloody Mary, or do it at night and film it, which sounds really creepy, I know, to like your teacher, go film yourself at night. No, but it's and no one ever takes me up on it. Everyone always says they will, but no one ever does. Yeah. But what I noticed was that it had shifted, right? Like it used to be back in the day, it used to be you did it 3 times, you did it at midnight, and whatever you thought happened, right? It's shifted to 3 a.m. because kids today are obsessed with 3 a.m. being the witching hour, right? And that's been through television shows, it's been through all this other stuff, and it's to the point where now people who are not teenagers and on those things also say you have to do things like Bloody Mary at 3 o'clock. And that's the ultimate time to do it. That's the only time to do it. And I've seen that kind of things. If you don't know what the back rooms are, you're old. You know what the back rooms are?
No, what are the back rooms?
We're old.
We're old, yeah.
If you don't know what the Walton Files are and what the
I know what the back room of a strip joint is, but I don't know what you're referring to.
Yeah, when I heard back rooms, I thought they were talking about that really good chicken finger place in Manchester, New Hampshire. So I don't know what but you know, it's shifted, and the weird thing is that the shifting is happening. You know, they always say social media platforms die when the balance of people over 40 tips. So people who are under 20 stop using it, and people who are over 40 use it. Mm-hmm. It's dead, right? It's like Facebook is dead. Instagram's dying. Twitter never was even alive. And so if you go there and you see like what's happening on those sites, you know, what's being transmitted to the teenagers is now seeping into the way that adults are perceiving, including ghost hunting groups, right? Mm-hmm. The way that they're perceiving the paranormal. And that's one of the things that I love to explore on the show, because I'm fascinated with how does a legend change?
Yeah. I never thought of it that
way. So,
okay,
you got to do this, right? You got to, we have an episode, which we did during the lockdown because we couldn't go anywhere to Legend Trip.
Yeah.
And so my daughter and I did an episode called The Home Haunting.
The Home Haunting.
And these were all digital legends. These were all like, you know, ghost legends that were being spread.
Yeah.
And we were going to do one a night.
Okay.
So for a week we were going to do one. And so it began with Ouija boards because that's a classic, right?
Yeah.
It moved on to Charlie.
Okay.
Which is, do you know what Charlie is?
I've heard of
it.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's kind of a modern take on a Ouija board. It's done with 2 pencils.
Okay.
And it's hilarious because I had never heard of Charlie. It was on the news down here that beware, your kid might be doing Charlie.
And then we put the 2 pencils like that.
Right, with the
pencils.
Yeah,
that's right, yeah.
And then on day 3 was Midnight Man. Okay. So at midnight, you're supposed to invite this person into your room, into your house, and then he chases you till 3 a.m. and you have to keep on the move. And I was like, okay, that's a really cool story. And then I'm reading it. And it's about, so you have to draw blood, and you have to write him this message in blood. And I was like, wait a minute. So now I'm doing so that sounds really making a pact with something evil kind of, right? But with modern face to it, right? Like, so it's old stuff, but with a modern face. Day 4 was day 4, we were going to do 1-person hide and seek, which is essentially where you take a stuffed animal, you rip it open, you cut its guts out, you fill it with rice. You put all these intentions into it, you sew it back up, and then at 3 a.m., you hide yourself somewhere, you prop it up, you hide, and then you wait for it to come get you. That's the stuff that's going on, and those are the legends that are being spread by these younger kids and on these areas. So, I honestly say it's like the only legend trip I wouldn't do. I when we got to actually doing it, it became, dude, this is messing with some stuff that's pretty serious. If you take the fun, face off of it, this is ancient and kind of ritualistic stuff that they're asking kids to do.
Yeah.
And it's just that modern face that draws them in. And so it's like, we ended up not doing any of the ones that were really, really intense because, I didn't want to send that message.
I guess nowadays too, you have stuff like, creepy pastas that generate all these new or sort of renovated legends, if you will, like stories, refurbished stories that have been told before, but different characters. And I never thought about it that way. I mean, it's noticeable. And of course on you see it on all these like TikTok and all that, man. It's just incredible. Some of the stuff that you find on there.
And it's, we did an episode. It's the only time I've ever done a warning before an episode. Because I'm used to like getting in trouble all the time, both in school and outside of school for things that I say and crossing the line. I'm like, that's good fun stuff.
Why couldn't we have you for a teacher then?
And so it was the only one that I had ever put as a disclaimer, because we were talking about, it just happened to be across my mind. Across my eyes on different platforms, there were 3 different suicide legends that kind of came out, right? Yeah. And they were all around the same time. And then there was this one that was gaining a lot of popularity about a massacre that happened that people were covering up. The town was covering it up. And this entire house, there was a party. All I remember is the girl's name was Ashley, was the only survivor. And everyone in the party was absolutely massacred, and they were trying to solve who had done this massacre, and she was the only survivor. And then the night right before the full moon, she committed suicide. And so the theory was that she was a werewolf. And so people were trying to say like, oh, has she survived? Did she not survive? Like, because she had left a suicide note that was like it. And so we used that as an intro to talking about things like Blue Whale, and the Momo Challenge and these urban legends of these suicide pacts. Yeah. None of which are ever true, right? Yeah. Because ultimately we wanted to get to Walking Sam, which was a real suicide legend. Okay. Right? Yeah. And so if you know Blue Whale and if you know the Momo Challenge, they're both very similar in that they set up this series of challenges you have to do. Right? So day one, you wake up an hour early, you know what I'm saying? Day 2, you steal $1 out of your parents' wallet. Day 3, you do this. And day 5, day 6 or 7, you bring a knife to school hidden and don't tell anyone. Right? And it goes and it goes and it goes until it gets to the point where it's you kill yourself. Like both the challenges end the same way. And it's not happening, right? Even though there are news report after news report after news report on legitimate news sources, these suicide challenges are not happening. 13 Reasons Why, right? If you know that show. Created its own mystique where there were these warnings that there was going to be this spike in teen suicides, and they were preempting it. They were saying this is going to happen. It was a legend. Like I was watching it in real time happening. Never happened, right? We have this fascination because we can't control it. And then eventually we use that as a way to talk about a famous suicide myth of the Lakota Native Americans at Wounded Knee, that they feel there's an actual like suicide, a very Slender Man type character walking out in the woods encouraging those Native Americans to commit suicide. And of course, on that reservation, which they sometimes hail as the paradigm of what you think of a bad reservation. I mean, the statistics of like alcoholism, unemployment, and they have a huge rate of teen suicide.
Yeah.
And so they attribute it to this walking Sam, who's this Slenderman type character wearing a top hat who walks throughout the woods. And when he extends his arms, you can see there's bodies hanging from it. And he whispers in the kids' ears all the things and all the great reasons they have to take their own lives. It's hopeless. You know, you need to take your life. So these are, and that's a real thing that has existed for, a few decades in that area, that the tribe takes seriously enough that they've actually looked into it. They've actually investigated whether or not this thing is real. They've actually believed what they've caught as evidence of this walking Sam trying to take their kids' lives. And so, the stuff is out there. It's just, it's there's layers between your average adult, even if you're a parent, and what the kids are doing.
Yeah. And I mean, let's face it. Some of these kids are so heavily influenced by some of these legends, like beyond obsessed, and into believing that these are reality.
Yeah, I mean, here's my daughter, right?
Yeah.
She's not here. This is where she is when there's a show. She's not here.
Yeah.
Here she is knowing this stuff, right? This is her life tracking these legends down.
Yeah.
And yet she was talking about the chapstick challenge, right?
Okay.
Which is where you go to school and you have chapstick, and when the chapstick ends, you're going to take your life, right? Huh. And she knows all this stuff's not true. And she's going, but Dad, like, I know someone who knows someone who knows someone who it happened to. And I'm like, hun, you just defined a friend of a friend legend. Like, that's So even someone with a head on her shoulders for this kind of stuff, like, is able to be taken in. And it's because, and this is why Slenderman was able to rise to such prominence.
Yeah.
It's because we, and them even more, can create content that's so realistic that you can't help but believe, right? Like, seeing is believing. So when you see multiple Slenderman videos where there's someone running out and then there's a shaky camera and then there's a weird thing standing off in the distance, what's his name? What's his name? Horn Man or whatever it is, like, and it's this giant who, like, he sounds like a horn. And he's like this harbinger of bad things to come. Okay. Right? Anyone with a rational mind knows that it's just a, like a Photoshop thing, right? And yet it's real because it's there, right?
Yeah.
They don't have that critical mindset. And so whenever I'm talking about these spooky things, one of my students will start talking about Horn Man, and I'm like, dude, do you really think there's no documentation of like a 17-story man with a horn for a head? Like, like that this is like, and it's like, well, yeah, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense, but you don't have time to think about it because your finger goes to the next video.
But Chris, he's in the same realm as Bigfoot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm with you. But here's the difference. It's like Bigfoot has had to like gain his fortune over centuries, right? And different variations of it, and people who have taken, okay, here's a sighting. Can we rationally have a cryptid in this world? Like, what would it mean? And like everything with the digital world now, there's just no time to process. Yeah. So you have something like Loeb, which is only less than a year old. And it's starting to creep in. Loeb is a digital ghost that's been created by AI.
Yes.
So,
yes.
You know what I'm talking about? If you anyone who's watching the show, minimize the screen, and on your other screen, bring up Loeb. And if you have nightmares, it's not my fault. You asked him. And it's it was created using negative attributes. Instead of, so you don't say what you're looking for. You say what you're looking for, but you put like a negative sign. I don't know the technology behind it. And it started to generate itself. And it started to get these, instead of deteriorating as an image, it started to get more and more graphic images that had nothing to do with it, like kids burning alive and like, you know, babies being eaten by you know, wolverines and so like there's really horrific stuff. And people say that like Loeb is now the ghost in the machine, that it's now jumped off of this computer program and this original digital content creator to its own thing. Yeah, there you go. That's Also, oddly enough, the person I just hit up on Tinder looked just like that. So,
well, that was Steve's Halloween costume.
Yeah, my Halloween costume. So talking about cryptids, I mean, do you do anything with cryptids down there?
You know, not too much. Obviously, we have skunk ape here.
Skunk ape, yeah.
And I really kind of live in this realm that is, kind of like these kind of like what somewhat ambiguous, like a puckwudgie. What the hell is a puckwudgie? Mm-hmm. Like, is it a demon? Is it an elemental? Is it a cryptid? Like, what is it? Like, it has so many weird things that it jumps from category to category depending on who's telling the story and what they want to do with it, right? And yet I've spent the last 3 years tracking these two very specific monsters. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really like, are they cryptids? Are they not? One is a woman who is half coyote, half woman.
Okay.
That appears in the OSCALA. And I can tell you both these stories if you want.
Absolutely, sure.
And then the other is the Stakini.
Yeah, wow.
So I'll start with the Stakini because it's the more well-known because it appears in other cultures. The Stakinis are, you gotta get ready for this now. They are Seminole witch vampire owls.
Yeah, okay.
Process all that. Okay, yeah. Seminole witch vamp. So they got a little bit of everything that freaks you out.
So stick that in your brain and what do you come up with? Wow.
Exactly. So they are these gigantic owl, like, you know, 6 foot tall, 5-6 foot tall owls that roam the woods near Tampa, basically feeding off of bad men. So if you have done something wrong, so the story goes that there was this Seminole woman whose husband had cheated on her. And so she prayed to she who walks the circle to get her revenge. And so she was given this power to get revenge on her husband. And then she was supposed to immediately give it back, right?
Yeah.
And so she didn't give it back because who wants to give that kind of power back?
Yeah.
Because she then was like, well, this other person, when I was younger, he did something really bad to me. And this other person, and it just became like addictive. And then every time she was casting a spell or using this power to get her vengeance, she was losing a little bit more of her humanity.
Oh, okay.
And so it kind of has this like Wendigo kind of like thing to it where it's a human who did something and then eventually like loses this, right?
Yeah.
And so now, and there's a whole coven of these. There's enough men who are horrible that there's an entire coven of these Seminole witches who all have a similar backstory. And they stalk the wooded areas. Right. So if you know Florida 75, the road that goes between like, you know, the border and Tampa and then comes down to where I live.
Yep.
They're supposed to be in the woods there. Right. And so there's this famous battle that happened called the Dade Massacre.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The Dade Massacre really kind of launches the Second Seminole War down here.
Okay.
And essentially what happened was tensions were rising. They wanted to, in the OSCALA National Forest, they wanted to reinforce that. So they were bringing troops from Fort Brooks in Tampa up to the OSCALA.
Okay.
And on the course of this, like, there's this horrible bridges were out. Like, they couldn't get where they were going. When they got to a town that now is known, at least this part where it is known as Bushnell, Florida, they were attacked by the Seminoles.
Okay.
And it was like December 29th. The American soldiers had these big coats on, so they couldn't get to their gun. They were in a advanced position, and they wiped out 102 people. Boom! Like in the course of hours, because they're just shooting from all over the place, and the Americans couldn't even get their guns out. Mm-hmm. So it is a 100% historical fact. Like, this is what happened. Yeah. There were 2 people who survived. One of them was able to really get their story out. You had the person who kind of maybe betrayed them, who was a Seminole who was kind of acting as their guide, who also gave details. And yet is a segment of Seminoles who believe that it was the Stikini, right?
Okay.
And that as soon as Dave's men started that day, on the first day of it, they took 2 or 3 of the people at night. And then the next day, people were seeing these beautiful women, because the Stikini are beautiful women by day. Mm-hmm. It's not until at night that they take this horrible form. And some of them got lured into the woods and were never seen again. And then that night, they took 5, right? And then the next day, a few more saw these beautiful women and wandered off into the woods. And then that night, they took another 10, right? Until there was no one left of Dade's little march. And one of the people was able to escape. He was freaked out. He decided it's better to go AWOL than to this mission is cursed. And he went crawling back to Tampa.
Okay.
And he's going through the woods and he stumbles upon the 3 of them in the woods. He's looking and it's literally the faces of the men he knows, his friends from his platoon, on the ground, like with their insides out, and they're boiling this soup. And the soup is all the intestines and all the inside stuff. And this is a story that Seminoles tell, right? This is what happened. And it's like, well, wait a minute. And it makes no sense to me, because it's like the Dade Massacre is a victory. It's a Seminole victory. You had superior firepower. You had superior strategy. Why is there this other legend that exists about these Stikinis? And it's because, spoilers, the Stikini are still out in the woods. There's still some freaky crap out in that area that people can't explain, and a lot of men go disappearing in that little stretch of land.
So it really does happen. Men really do go missing.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Wow.
I mean, I was getting, when I was writing the book about the OSCALA, I was getting all of these reports that were very similar of car engines dying,
okay,
and then being attacked by this screeching thing, and that would leave these claw marks on the cars and stuff like that, and they were all in the same area of the OSCALA and the same and the. And it was matching the descriptions of what's going on with Stikini. So,
wow.
And that's a legend, by the way. There's a whole bunch of tribes that have legends that are like that, right? And so when you hear it over multiple tribes, multiple areas of the United States, you're like, okay, there's got to be at least some reality to this as being some kind of maybe cryptid that's in the woods that's doing this that we just haven't discovered yet.
So
maybe we made these stories.
So have you gone there yourself? And looked around this place, or? Well,
it's the unfortunate thing. It's a pretty vast area, but I've spent enough time in the OSCALA looking for it in areas that people are. Yeah. I'm a great man who would never cheat or do a woman wrong at all. So I'm feeling like maybe that's why I haven't had contact with the Stikini.
You've been spared.
But I will say, in that area, I may have dated a witch or two who was about that scary and who probably wants to rip my insides out.
So how do you spell that, Stikini?
Stikini.
That's fascinating. And this is just off the 75. You said just what north of Tampa?
Yeah. Like they're the OSCALA is north of Tampa.
Yeah.
So it's if you imagine where 75 exists now, there used to be another road there called King's Road.
Okay.
That 75 is like a highway, but King's Road is more of it was more of like a path.
What it was before it
right. So it would kind of be to the west.
Yeah.
And then from Tampa up to OSCALA, which is not a very far distance unless you're marching with a platoon of men who are being eaten by owls.
Yeah, eaten by owls. Okay, so what was the other one that you had? Another one that you were going to tell us.
Oh yeah, the coyote. So
yeah.
This is crazy because I got this as a message like, hey, have you heard the one about which is the emails I love? Like, no, tell me about it.
Yeah.
And so it takes place in the town of Rosewood, Florida.
Okay.
And this guy used to walk in the woods in the OSCALA with his grandfather, and his grandfather would tell him this story. So it's old enough that it would predates the grandfather, because the grandfather is saying, this is a story that I heard growing up. So it's supposed to be, if you imagine that's got to be at least 70 years old, right? And there was this woman, a young girl, 14-year-old girl, who fell in love with a man, and her parents wanted nothing to do with it, mainly because he was black and she was white.
Okay.
And so they were not going to have that. And so they used to escape. They used to, run out, escape their houses, ditch their houses, and they would meet in this cemetery, and they would, talk about the future, and, I'm sure just talk about the future. There was nothing physical that ever happened in the cemetery ever. And eventually the father found out that they were meeting each other there, and he confronted the man in the town center of Rosewood, and he beat the man pretty much to death. The man was never seen again. Some people say he dragged him off into the nearby woods. Other people say that the guy was just so freaked out he left the town and never came back. But no one helped him, right? Like the people actually gathered as a circle around him and were kind of like cheering him on doing this. The black people in the area, the African Americans wouldn't have, they were too scared to help. And so she's walking in town later that day and she sees this blood and people are kind of like, avoiding eye contact with her until she finally realizes what's been going on. She's like, why would no one help? And so she runs back to the house. She gets her father's handgun. And when he comes into the house, she shoots and kills him.
Oh, wow.
And now she realizes like she's killed her father. Her mom's going to be home anytime now. Her mom, who always loved her and like was trying, like fought to get her to stay in the house. And so she runs to the only safe place she knows, which is the cemetery, right?
Yeah.
And so she goes to the cemetery and she's crying and she's crying and she's wailing and she's crying harder and harder. And all of a sudden, this pack of coyotes start to circle around the cemetery itself, right?
Okay.
And they start howling and she's crying. And then she just starts screaming in grief. And the screams and the howls just kind of mix into this very unique sound. And then she lies down on one of the graves. She puts the gun to her head. She says his name and she kills herself. Only she never actually dies. Almost instantly, her body's like lifted up and it starts to transform into this wolf-type creature. And she jumps from where she is into the pack and the pack take off. And so once again, if you are a bad person and you're in that section of the woods, once again, an area known for a lot of disappearances and a lot of mysterious missings, it could be that she has taken you, that you will hear that scream and you will hear that howl together, and then you'll be taken, right? So like she just knows she's stalking the woods looking for bad men. And this is like a pretty amazing story. And you're like, oh my word.
Yeah.
And here's the deal, right? There's never been a town known as Rosewood, Florida.
I was going to say, where is Rosewood, Florida?
So there is a Rosewood, Florida. If I have any history buffs whatsoever,
okay,
they know that there used to be a town of Rosewood, Florida, and it was the site of something called the Rosewood Massacre, which was pretty much imagined to kill a mockingbird with guns. Where the entire African-American settlement within this one town in Florida was wiped out because they went in looking for someone who had committed an assault, essentially.
Okay.
And so Rosewood doesn't exist anymore, right? But if there was a Rosewood, Florida, but it's way on the other side of the state, right? It's not anywhere near there.
Okay.
It's more the town of Paisley, Florida.
Okay.
And so we went, and we were lucky because we were able to find the cemetery that day. The OSCALA, cemeteries disappear all the time. Like you can go in a cemetery on a Tuesday, it won't be there when you go back on a Thursday, and then it'll appear again. Like there's this weird shift thing that happens there where things flux in and out. It's kind of one of the trademarks of the OSCALA. Anyone who lives there will tell you, like, yeah, the dirt bike trail I take every day wasn't there yesterday, so we decided not to go. But the cemetery itself is there. It still exists. I took pictures of it. The guy's like, yeah, there's a fence, but that's the cemetery. It didn't have a fence when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So we can say this is real. I can tell you this element doesn't exist. That element doesn't exist. I can bring in Romeo and Juliet, right? We teach that in freshman English. I can bring in all these different aspects, but it doesn't change the fact that as a kid, this guy would go into that cemetery because this is what the kids do. Go into a cemetery. They put their hands over their chest like this. They sit on a grave. They close their eyes, and they start to hear that weird howling and that weird screaming. And the loser that night is the person who gets so freaked out that they leave the cemetery. So you prove your manhood in Paisley, Florida, by lying on that grave until everyone else has kind of gotten out of there and fled.
You know,
By the way, coyotes
yeah,
have only existed in Florida since the 1970s. So how a coyote woman exists when coyotes weren't even in the state?
and I was gonna say they're flourishing down there now, huh?
Oh yeah,
They're really
yeah.
they're
Yeah,
really
if I
taking
walk
off.
my dog right about now, I'll see 2 or 3, and I live in a very residential area.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's funny because I should introduce you to a friend of ours, Joe Dunn. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He goes by the name the Florida Trailblazer.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And he tracks down these old cemeteries in the middle of nowhere and ghost towns
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere in and around that area.
So it's what you have to realize is that in Florida,
Yeah.
it's not like necessarily other places. I don't know if it's the peninsula aspect of it or what,
Yeah.
but it's like towns would have these railroad towns would come up, they would boom.
Okay.
And then the railroad would shift to another
Yeah.
town due to politics or whatever, and the town would just die out.
Yeah.
And so you have all of these in that central Florida area that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You have all of these trail towns, these railroad towns that don't exist anymore. But there's a lot of stories about them, and for every one of them, it makes logical sense. There, you know, I was talking about the love potion earlier. That's in the town of, and I mispronounced this for years, right? It's pronounced Laredo, Florida, but it's spelt Florida without an F.
Oh,
so
wow.
I actually had people tell me, you know, you misspelled Florida in your book. I'm like, no, that's the name of the town, Laredo, Florida. It's the name of the town. And it fails, right? After World War II, it fails. And if you ask the people of the town at the time, like post-World War II, why this town was failing, it's because there was this woman who was a witch who everyone relied on for their herbal remedies, even though they wouldn't say it in the public. And after she was murdered because she refused to sell a love potion, we'll go with that version of the story.
Yeah.
But it actually is she wanted the man's firstborn child. And he ends up killing her, throwing her off the bridge and killing her. Her body goes to the surface, and they're like, well, she can't be buried in our Christian cemeteries. And so they bury her in this kind of unmarked grave, and all of a sudden she starts to appear on the road.
Oh,
and she
wow.
becomes very much like a classic hitchhiker legend on this strip of road.
Yeah.
And as that's happening, the town is failing, right?
Yeah.
And so they dig her up, right? And they say, there's only one thing we can do. We're going to bury her in another town. And so they bury her in another town, but that doesn't help, right? She still is being seen on the bridge.
Oh,
She's still kind of populous area. So then they decide that they're going to dig her up again. They're going to burn her.
Yeah.
And they're going to spread the ashes in another county. And when that doesn't work, they then go to her old house and they burn that down. I was actually able to find a newspaper article talking about this shack being, burnt down, this house that she used to live in. And she's there. She's there to this day, right? Like I've actually, seen weird stuff at that bridge. But the interesting thing is she's the reason why this town failed, right? And really what it had to do with is it was a one-stop town. It relied on the railroad. The railroad shifted. Almost the entire male population over the age of 20 went to fight in World War II. A large portion of them died, and the rest of them, when they got a little bit of a taste of the world outside of Laredo, Florida, decided never to go back, right? And so it cycled. As less people were coming back, businesses were closing, so more people were losing money, so more people were leaving, more businesses were going under. Like, it's a totally rational situation, and yet this story has developed as to why this woman was the cause of all their sorrow. And you see that kind of stuff happen in different variations all throughout those ghost towns of Florida.
That's insane. We're going to take a short break here for station identification. But when we come back, let's gear into a little bit of Mother's Day scenarios and more. By the way, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Hope you had a great Mother's Day. So we'll be right back with Christopher Balzano, and hold tight. We'll be right back. Nocturnal Frequency Radio here live on the New Visions Radio Network. And some technical issues. Woohoo! No, I think
That's
we're
always
okay.
fun.
I know. It looked like Mixler was acting up a bit, but it's not. We're all good. So welcome back. You're listening and watching Nocturnal Frequency Radio here on the New Visions Radio Network, and of course, simulcasting on our YouTube channel and Twitch. And this evening we have our returning guest, Christopher Balzano, and it's been, like I said, I don't know how long it's been. At least 7 years?
Has it been that long?
It's been a while.
Wow. Yeah, your face just seems so familiar to me. I don't know. It must be. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember. Well, like I said, we mentioned, you were still situated in Massachusetts there, and
Right.
and I think you just moved down to Florida. I think the second time we had you on the show.
Yeah, I've been. I don't give this information regularly, but I've been down here 15 years now.
Yeah, you've been down there for a while.
Almost.
So.
It's 15. It'll be 15 years on July 1st. I just want to say, your chat room is great.
Yeah.
By the way, so keep it rolling, you guys in the chat room.
Oh yeah.
I'm looking through, and I'm like, for some reason, usually when I'm in, I can respond, and I haven't been able to respond. But can I address a few things that I saw in the
go
chat
for it.
here?
Absolutely.
Great.
Go for it. Yeah.
First thing is just to throw it out there to you guys, because I saw some discussion on it. Much of the OSCALA exists above phosphorus mines. As a matter of fact, the first Fort King, I had mentioned Fort King earlier, the first Fort King that was built, they had to abandon it because it was built on a phosphorus mines and they couldn't get any well water. So they built this entire fort before they decided to look for water. But there are certain paranormal things that happen that are similar, that are linked to different places where phosphorus mines pop up all throughout the forest. And then into some other areas. It's funny when you talk about the OSCALA, I always talk about the shadow of the OSCALA, because there are towns that do not touch the forest, but when you ask them to explain the why things happen, they say, oh, it's the forest, it's the OSCALA. So a place like Gainesville, for example, which is known for the college and for football and all the stuff like that, there are things that happen there that people relate it to what's going on in the forest. So I wanted to say the phosphorus is alive and well and popping in the OSCALA and a lot of these things I'm talking about. And the second thing is, I want everyone to think about
Mm-hmm.
growing up and that spooky town, the spooky house in your town, right?
Yeah.
And it was a badge of honor to go up to the house and knock 3 times, right? And this is probably more what a lot of people have experienced. There's an area where on certain nights there are ghost lights. And you go and travel there. There's one here in Florida called the Oviedo Lights, which was so popular. That's kind of outside of Orlando. It was so popular, people would take dates there. It was known as a makeout spot. You watch the Oviedo Lights and you try to get a little something. But then it became so popular that the college that is now University of Central Florida had advertisements. The art club is going to see the Oviedo Lights. It was this crazy popular thing. So I want you to imagine that, right? Imagine that's what a legend trip is. Right?
Yeah.
Go out because you've heard of this thing in your town. You grew up hearing about it. Whatever. In the smaller the town, the more likely it is to have something like this. So imagine that. That's what the kids are doing digitally, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a lack of supervision, which we can all agree exists, right?
Yeah.
It's not that the kids have too much time on their hands or something like that. They're doing the same campfires and the same stories that we're doing, only it's in a digital form. And it's more a reflection of how they're getting it of a time than the fact that there's less supervision, because who was supervising us when we were riding our bikes going to the spooky house? You know what I'm saying? To no one was supervising us. My parents didn't have the slightest idea where I was. when we were doing those things. And so I caution against just saying that it's a reflection of the times and like, well, kids today are doing this, that, and the other thing. It's sad that they're doing it in a digital format as opposed to getting out there.
Yeah,
but guess what? They're getting out there and doing that stuff just as much as well. So those things are also still alive. But they don't do campfires, right? Like we've stopped doing the Boy Scouts, and camping in general is down, right? Like it's not as popular as it used to be for one reason or another. Every bad thing I learned, from swearing to smoking to how to sneak out of the house to what sex was, I learned from my older cousins, right? Like their cousins, there's always like one
blame it on the cousins,
right? That's older, and then you eventually became that cousin, and you were like, and so kids, and this is more of a sign of like, society. Kids don't spend nearly as much time with their cousins, right? Like my kids don't even know their cousins. We live in different states, and I think that family unit breakdown, that like the parents are off doing whatever. And they're and then the upstairs attic, all the kids are, socializing. You've got everyone who's from 15 to 7, all in this area. And that's where you're getting a lot of these stories. You don't have cousins, you don't have campfires, but you have TikTok. And so it's just a difference in the medium and not necessarily a good or a bad one.
We speaking of old houses and stuff like that, when I was a kid, going to school and junior high and then high school, there used to be this house. I lived in a suburban area, and across one of the main roads was still farmland and wooded area and stuff like that. But on this suburban side, there was a piece of land, like there was an old house with a barn that I guess they didn't want to sell out to the city during the development, so they kept the land. And people always referred to this house being, it having 2 dogs that were evil and had glowing red eyes. And if you tried to sneak into the barn, there's this scary looking doll that would rock in a rocking chair, but you couldn't get close to the doll because the dogs would get you. Right? It's like, I know. It's like when you're a kid, you're like, I want to see this, man. I gotta check this out. And I remember one time, walking home from school and said, hey, there's a house, let's go in. And by that time they had it all fenced off, this huge fence, 11 feet tall, whatever. It was huge, but we climbed it.
Well, they had to put the fence there because some kids a few years ago got in there and they never found.
They never found the kids. But hey, so I'm still here.
Whatever they do to try to defuse the legend becomes fuel for it. Right?
Exactly. So we snuck in there. We went in there and we went to the barn, and we're looking around. There's nothing in there. And all of a sudden, you hear these dogs barking. And it was just dogs in the neighborhood, right? It wasn't, but you're on edge. You're like, oh my God, the dogs are outside. Let's get the hell out of here. So we turned around, skedaddled out of there. But, didn't see anything.
Yeah. All of that stuff you're talking about, though, is like, all themes from all these different legends that have existed for years, right? I mean, like, a dog protecting the underworld, a place of evil. I think I heard that in my Greek mythology once. And everything about that. And then, of course, what happens is that stuff does happen, right? Natural or unnatural stuff does happen. And with every story like yours, and then you throw it, it's like, we know it's just dogs in the neighborhood. Yeah. But in the back of your mind, there's that one little segment of your mind that will always think like,
the dogs were there. The dogs were there.
Yeah. Was it Petey or was it, the demon from hell? Like it'll and that's what kind of feeds it, because, someone else has heard your story and it's manipulated and it's changed just enough to be realistic that it survives.
Yeah.
And that doesn't push the paranormal aside, right? That doesn't say that these places don't have paranormal or supernatural things that happen. You have to embrace that they're two different things,
I would have loved to have had the time to go in there and investigate the place. I would have loved it.
Yeah.
To see what you'd be able to find.
Yeah, now you go back and you say like, oh, if only I could go back to that cemetery and knock on that mausoleum 3 times and say, how are you doing in there, to hear the guy say, you know, whatever it is. Like the book I'm working on now is it's those kind of legend tripping urban legend rituals and cemeteries throughout the country.
Yeah. And there's plenty of those, right?
Pop up. Yeah. I mean, it's like one of those things where if I just were to say, hey, I'm just going to concentrate for a week on ones from Alabama, I have a week worth of material. You know what I'm saying? Like they're that frequent, and I have a very thin spectrum of what I'm allowing for the book. Okay. So it can't just be a haunted cemetery. It has to be something you do to provoke, or you have to go on a certain night or do something a certain way. And even with those limitations, with those parameters, I'm still finding, you know, so much material that it's almost overwhelming.
You know, speaking of cemeteries, we were researching and investigating a old pioneer cemetery, and
where is this?
This is up here in Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
And it was it originally was a family plot. It started off as a family plot, and then as the area grew, more and more families buried their loved ones in there. And this was at the time when loyalists were fleeing the U.S. So they're coming up here, and they're you know, buying land and settling here. And this was a loyalist sort of cemetery, and mainly children.
Yeah.
Due to influenza and smallpox, you know, just devastating the children. And when you go up to this place, it's on a small hill. And at the time, still pretty much like that. There was the house that was originally associated with this plot of land was there up until about maybe 7 years ago. And then they destroyed the house, and a mansion was built, unfortunately. But when you went up to this place, you could hear what sounded like ghost chatter. Like literally sounded like people talking, but you couldn't make out what they were saying.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, you know, constantly. So much stuff happened in this place, Chris, over the years. But one time, in particular, we went up there. We were doing some work with the city on documenting the people who are buried there. Because it was sparse. There was not a lot of information about a lot of the families that had buried people there. In fact, we had to get information from outside sources, independent researchers who took the time to track down family members and everything else to find out who was buried there. Their own research. But we were up there, and we were taking some photos and some audio. We were doing some audio work. And it was pretty foggy, very misty. I believe it was late October, early November. So here it starts to cool down. Well, you know, you're from the Mass area. You know what it's like.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know Ontario cold, but I know cold. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's roughly about the same. It's not too much, unless you're from Buffalo, New York. Come on. So we're up there, and you know, we split up. I got a guy in front of me, and I'm snapping some photos. And at one point, I got 2 people in front of me. I'm snapping photos, and all I have is one person in the photo. Okay, what's going on here? There's 2 people in front of me, but I'm reviewing the photos. There's only one person in the photos. What is going on here? So, you know, I call out to the guy in front of me. I said, hey, where's so-and-so? Oh, he's over on the other part with the other 2. Okay, who's in between us? Because I'm taking photos, and there's only one of you in the photos. What's going on? And as I said that, the person, whoever was in between us, walked off into the corner of the cemetery and completely disappeared by the fence.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. No, it's, it's interesting because people always say, why would a ghost be at a cemetery? It didn't die there.
Yeah.
It didn't. And what I think some neglect to understand is that cemeteries are markers of our life, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some place where you can go to be recognized and be honored and be visited, right? And so I think that there's not the same kind of draw that you might have in like a haunted house or something, but I believe cemetery stories, and I think that the majority of time when you hear a real cemetery story or a cemetery story that makes sense to me, it has either one of two things. It has either a forgotten cemetery, right? Or a forgotten marker, or a marker that has been vandalized, or some kind of forgotten nature to it. The world has grown up around it. You know what I'm saying? And people no longer come to this cemetery. Or it's got children.
Yeah.
And when you have those two elements combined, you almost always get some kind of story coming out of it. Mm-hmm. And those I can believe, because I honestly feel that that the paranormal and a ghost, it can be stuck in the place where it died. It can be drawn to the place where people remember it. Mm-hmm. And I think that cemeteries fill that bill as much as any other place that might have been involved in their life.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting place. I mean, obviously, automatically people, fear cemeteries because what they stand for. This is where you bury loved ones, lay them to rest, and all that kind of stuff. Although at the same time, you go there to visit them and pay homage and tribute and all sorts of things. But to think of going there at night, and with some of these places, some of these cemeteries, where they're located too.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know. I find it fascinating because the architect of a lot of these, the stones and everything else, especially the older the better to me. But
yeah. People always ask me, what is the scariest place I've been?
Yeah.
And the weird thing is that I approach the paranormal, especially now, with awe, right? Yeah. Like I am not jaded. I am not, and I'm not the kind of person who goes I look for the experience. So I'm not looking to prove a haunting right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I almost never am scared when I'm out there. I'm scared of ticks, especially my belly button. I'm scared of heights and commitment and like pink eye being a teacher, right? Like ghosts don't scare me. I've had pretty horrific experiences. And in the moment there was reactionary, but scared is not something. And I'm not saying, trust me, I'm not tough. I cry every day. So the scariest place I've ever been was in Indiana. It's right on the border between Indiana and Ohio, and it's this place called, we heard it as Brazil, Indiana, like Brazil, Indiana, Indiana. It's actually in Groveland, Indiana. And it's Groveland Cemetery, and it's 100-step cemetery, right?
Okay.
So the deal is at exactly midnight, although if the teens get to it, it'll be 3. At exactly midnight, you walk up these 100 stairs, and you have to count the stairs as you go. And if you count 100 steps, the original caretaker of the cemetery which is weird because the word they use always is undertaker, which has nothing to do with the cemetery.
Yeah. So
it's the caretaker will come up to you and have a conversation with you about when you're going to die. Then, right, once you've gotten this information, you have to go back down the stairs, and you once again have to count the stairs as you go. And if you don't count 100 on the way down, you're going to die within a week.
Oh.
Or if you're really unlucky, when you reach the bottom, if you haven't counted 100 steps, the last step will open up and suck you into hell.
That's a good one. I like the last one.
So To some degree, the term urban legend was invented in Indiana, right?
Okay.
So Harold Brunvard was he did like a lot of his undergraduate work and his graduate work there. He eventually taught there. He was one of the people, like, if you go, the American Journal of Folklore, edited that, ran that, Contemporary American Folklore, literally wrote these books, ends up going to Utah and starting or heading the folklore session there. And that's kind of where the idea of friend of a friend tales and the term urban legend gets coined, right, from this guy. But for a while, especially in his early days, he was in Indiana. Mm-hmm. And so there are literally hundreds of documented versions of this story in the Indiana archives, right? Because it's a local story, it's folklore, it's spooky folklore, so it's well documented. I always call it the most. People yell at me because they're really like, no, it's this place and that place. I'm like, no, I'm telling you, the most documented haunting is this place. It's not, it's not one of these famous places. It's not Waverly Hills or this is some place that, for generations, people have been telling these stories, and it's in an archive, with seals of notary publics, getting this stuff down. And so as we had this very profound paranormal experience near Indianapolis in the early evening. And so now we're driving to Groveland in the middle of the night to get there at midnight. And I'm telling you, it's a friggin' horror story. It starts to rain. We're going off in the middle of nowhere. Lightning is kind of going off, right? We're going up this absolutely destroyed road. We've been reading story after story after story about this place for an hour getting there. By the time we get there, it's just about midnight. And when I say in the middle of nowhere, it is in the middle of nowhere. And we're killing dozens of frogs driving up the road. That's how country this place is. And it's raining. And we get to the cemetery, and I have no memory of it whatsoever, right? We were so scared crapless. Yeah. And I don't even have pictures of it. There's a Facebook Live video. Pictures? There's a Facebook Live video where I'm like, hi, here we are. We're at the 100 cemetery. And it had to do with all the elements you were just talking about. The cemetery, the mystique of the cemetery, the middle of nowhere. It's not supposed to be in this place, right? It's and with the generations of stories that were being told about it, that are documented, that are on, file after file after file we were, especially having had an experience in the afternoon, we were so geared up that it completely blanked that natural inquisitive mind I have, and it was 100% raw nerve. And I've seen pictures of it during the day, and it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah. I know all of the lore behind it. I know that it acts as one of the 7 gates of hell in Indiana now. I know its place in this bigger context of everything. And I know it's the most harmless place in the world. And I want to go there again. But on that night, that was it.
So that night did you encounter one of the scariest places you've ever been to?
That would be the most scared I've ever been. I'm not sure if I would count it as the scariest place I've ever been to, but
one of the most scary.
But definitely the most scariest moment, and it was all because of the ambiance and the setting, and not necessarily because of anything that actually happened or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay, so where would you say was the most frightening, scariest place, creepiest place you've ever been to?
So those are different terms for me.
Okay.
Because like I said, scared. I've
creepy.
I've been a lot of places. Keep in mind, like the OSCALA, Freetown, that are frequented by cult members, by scary elements of humans that make them scary because of that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the creepiest, it has to be, and this is going to sound really weird because it was in the middle of the day, but the Devil's Tree here in Florida has one of those feels to it. There are very few places I've been that feel not balanced. Like there's weird things going on. It felt dark and heavy and oppressive. It's the site of a double murder by Florida's most prolific serial killer, Gerard Schaefer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He killed anywhere between 6 and 120 women.
Oh, wow.
And so he's the kind of guy who, when Ted Bundy met him at Stark Prison in Florida, Ted Bundy went up to him and shook his hand and said, "Thank you. I never would have thought to kill 2 women at once if it hadn't been for you." I mean, this is the kind of weird, sick individual that we're talking about. Wow. And so he was a Martin County sheriff. So he was a sheriff, and he had a habit of abducting 2 women at once.
Wow. And
he was eventually caught because he picked up these 2, late teens, and he hung them up, which was his kind of MO. He hung them up, and then he got a call on his police squad car that he had to go be a cop for a bit. So he left them there to go be a cop, and they escaped. And so as he was kind of in jail awaiting trial for that, they kind of started making connections between other things. And one of these murders is said to have happened at the Devil's Tree. There's a lot of false information about the Devil's Tree, but that site, they were never found near the tree. They were found a distance away. There's no evidence that they were found hung from the tree. That's not like, there's a weird structure near the tree in the woods that no one can tell me what it is, but there's an urban legend that it was his house. And I'm like, dude, it's not his house. Just being in that area, bright sunny day, we were escorted. We couldn't find it. We were in the wrong part of the park. Okay. And a little kid went, "Hey, are you looking for the Devil's Tree? I'll show you where it is." Like, that's how infamous it is in the area, right?
Yeah.
And took us right to the tree, and it's they say it's indestructible, so you can see where people have tried to chop it down, where people have tried to burn it down, and the saws break and the axes break and the fires go out, and it's this indestructible thing. And we did like a little session where we just put our heads against that tree and like closed our eyes, because you're supposed to, they have the ghosts of the 2 women are supposed to be seen hanging from the tree. Yeah. There are these dark shadow people who are supposed to be circling it both during the day and at night. You know what I'm saying? And if you are looking for evidence, we got like a few interesting EVPs, of this really dark voice that now, for a while, it was on every recording. We would have the same exact voice talking to us. But in terms of like what happened, did anything jump out? No. But I've never felt so sad in a location in my life.
Yeah.
And at one part, while we were doing that, my partner at the time got a call, and she had to like walk away, and she came back bawling her eyes out that she had just gotten like the worst news you can imagine getting. And it was this feeling of utter oppression, not depression, which was part of it, but oppression.
Yeah.
And you knew you were just in a bad place. And it was crazy because it was a beautiful day, and it's a beautiful park, and we had spent all this time like searching parts of it and making jokes, and then it was completely shifted. And that's creepy to me. When a location is so tainted, so cursed, that it actually changes you instantly upon experience with it, that to me is like the really creepy part of sometimes what we do sometimes.
So the oppression, the creepiness, the being, even though being on a bright, beautiful sunny day, it's the historical aspects behind that tree, the history.
Yeah. But see, here's the thing. Because I can say that about some locations.
Yeah.
I had like my puffed out chest. I'm like, I'm the smartest friggin' folklorist in Florida. I know all these things that all the other people are getting wrong. It was, like I had that kind of attitude of like, it's just a friggin' tree when a murder happened.
Yeah.
Like I know 1,000 places where people in black robes appear. Whatever, been there, done that. Like I did not have the attitude of the history weighing me down going in. It was literally when we got in proximity to that tree that I lost control over what my emotions were. And so I can say a lot of places, and I'm looking for it, right? I'm looking around saying, I can see how a ghost story comes out of this place, right? Or I can see like, okay, like I'm not trying to prove it wrong, but I'm like, now that I understand the context of it, I can see it. I can do it. Devil's Tree, totally different. I went in there as the most knowledgeable, not affected person about this location, and it took me.
Wow, that's but that's just insane. Just like the history, the background. It just oh wow, and what was it? The most notorious aspect of this serial killers. The I don't know. Obviously there was other places because you're saying anywhere from 2 to 100 odd
3
killings?
to 120. Yeah,
120 killings.
What happened was that when they connected him to another murder that he ultimately got convicted of, they raided him and his mother's house. And when they raided especially his mother's house, they found all of these different trophies that they were able to connect to other crimes. Right. And so they were able to be like, this is an unsolved murder. This is her driver's license.
Oh, yeah.
But then also he wrote a book. And that book is kind of like all the details of the crimes are laid out. It's just that names are changed and stuff like that. So it's like they have all of this documentation of things that he potentially could have done, and then ones that he was just never convicted for. That they're like, well, really, this case is closed because Schaefer ended up being killed in jail. And in addition to that, he was having a degree or having a background in law enforcement and having gone through schooling and being a very educated man. He was kind of like a jailhouse lawyer for a lot of people.
Oh, okay.
So he knew a lot about a lot of crimes. And so he would throw out details of these things. And you didn't know whether he did it or whether he didn't do it. Where did he get this information from? Why does he have all these details about it? Was it something that he had done or something he heard about? He never used the word serial killer.
Yeah.
He would always say SK.
SK.
And if you on Nocturnal Frequencies would be like, blah, 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 Gerard Schaefer is a serial killer, and he heard about it, he would sue you.
Oh, wow.
And then with the other hand, he would also foster the reputation of how many women he had killed. And so he's really this kind of boogeyman of Florida that a lot of unsolved murders, and then a lot of haunted locations that are connected with murders, eventually, if you connect the dots, make their way back to Schaefer.
Oh, wow.
And so probably the most famous unsolved murder in Florida is this murder that happened about 50 years ago called Little Miss Panisofsky, who was found in the Panisofsky River. And everyone has been so obsessed for 50 years with trying to identify who she is. Yeah. Unsolved Mysteries has featured it twice. Okay. And it's always focused on who she is because they can't identify her as opposed to who did it. And I'm like, why is Gerard Schaefer not good for this? He was in that. I can prove he was in that area. He had killed 2 women. Maybe we just haven't found the other one that was with Little Miss Panisofsky. But it's just one of those things where he's so ingrained in both folklore and in true crime here in Florida that his name eventually pops up if these kinds of things are going on.
That's insane. That's insane. Because I mean, it's like saying, well, Chris, how many haunted locations are linked to serial killers or murders of mass proportion or whatever, and yeah, here you are talking about this guy.
Yeah, it's funny because after I published the Haunted Ocala, and it's part of the Haunted America series, right?
Yeah.
So it has to be a certain way. They want their books a certain way.
Yeah.
They all have the same amount of pages and stuff like that. And, you know, and so I had to not include a lot of my research because I've got a meandering mind. Like I make these connections and stuff like that. For the first 6 months after that book was published, I wasn't going on any ghost shows or anything like that. I was going on true crime things, right? Because I'm like, oh, who's in the Ocala? Oh, I don't know. How about Ted Bundy? Otis Toole. How about the murder of the Walsh kid that started America's Most Wanted? How about Monster? How about the Ron Furling, the vampire killer? The Gainesville Ripper. They're all connected to the Ocala National Forest, and that's just the famous big names that people know.
Is it the forest though? These killers know that there's this massive forest that could act as a great hiding place. When you can get away with anything.
When I was doing Dark Woods, so my first book about Freetown, right?
Yeah.
I was working with Alan Alves, who is he was a detective for Freetown, which is a small town. It's a rural town, especially when he was there. And he was involved in more than 30 homicide investigations.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. There was such a tilt to occult crime in that town that he became one of the leading experts in the country in the height of the Satanic Panic, even of of cult crimes, because there were so many happening there. And his theory, straight out, you can commit a murder in Boston. You can dump that body in Freetown in less than an hour. You can commit a murder in Providence, Rhode Island, or Brockton, these places that are historically very rough. Dump it in that forest, and probably no one will ever find it, right? Very hardcore. It's a little bit different in the Ocala because there are permanent cult-like residents in that forest year-round.
Really?
Right? There are these people known as the Rainbow Children or the Rainbow People.
Yeah.
Which exist all across the country. I'm not sure if there's any in Canada, but and they find a state park, right? They go there usually during a warm month, and here it's February because it's warm here in February.
Yeah.
But other places it's like the end of summer, and they have a music festival in the woods for 2 weeks, and then they leave. Problem is, a lot of the Rainbow People don't leave Florida. Right? They stay in that forest, and they've been infiltrated by other people who are kind of taking that peace, love, hippie feel, New Age feel, and kind of manipulating it and changing it and hiding under the guise of it. In addition to that, now if we're just talking true crime, we're not talking paranormal type stuff.
Yeah.
There are a lot of drugs that come in through the Gulf of Mexico that have to make their way to the East Coast, which is only 200 miles, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is there are a lot of elements who are taking the drugs from places like Tampa or stuff that's on the Gulf of Mexico, and they bring it across the state through the forest into Daytona and then up, that bring another element of that. And there's however many drugs there are going one way, there's just as many people and human trafficking going the other way. Yeah. And so it's this real mixture of real criminal elements, many of whom are wearing a mask of the boogeyman to kind of hide what they're doing or to get through what they're doing. And it's really this perfect storm of something very, very supernatural happening. A community of people who are in the area that have this new age mindset and a very dark, manipulative criminal element that are doing a lot of really nasty things. So it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
That is crazy. And well, look, you want to talk about scary. There's nothing more scary than humans.
Right?
Really. I mean, there's some really, really, really scary people out there.
Yeah.
And in some cases, you would never even notice on the surface.
I have good friends who do a true crime podcast called Paradise After Dark.
Oh, cool.
And
yeah.
it happened to be that, now keep in mind, I've been researching cults since 2000 when Freetown came on my radar, right?
Yeah.
And so I have noticed patterns and stuff like that. And I'm not talking conspiracy theories. I'm just talking about, like, hey, look for this kind of stuff. You can't be in Florida and watch the news where the word OSCALA doesn't come up, right?
Yeah.
And there was a stretch where there were a ton of missing people connected to the OSCALA that all had the same physical attributes and family backgrounds. I mean, it was like, it might as well have just been central casting, woman after woman after woman after woman after woman. And my friends were on they do this true crime podcast, and I'm like, Tab, you don't see the pattern? They're like, no. And it's like, well, you just did you're about to do an episode on this missing person. Let me see if I can connect the profile. She's between this age. She's got 2 kids that are this age and this age. And she's like, yeah, how'd you know? I'm like, because it's the same thing happening over and over again. And so there's really scary. It's the whole hashtag Florida man is not just a joke. Like, there are some really sketchy things going on because Florida has 1 foot in one world and 1 foot in the other. It's part America and it's part not America.
Yeah.
And
have you seen that? Have you seen the documentary Florida Man?
No.
Oh, Chris, watch it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you can get it. I think Vimeo has it, or it might even be on YouTube. It's called Florida Man. It's it just gives you a perspective. It's a bunch of guys that go around and they interview just ordinary people from around Florida, and it's interesting who they pick out, and their stories are just wow. It really gives you.
No, it's funny because a lot of the stories that I researched and then they've got a Florida twist to them. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, welcome to Florida. That's something that we say all the time. And I live in a fairly normal-ish area.
Yeah.
Because it is so, transient, and most people here are not from here. Once you get outside of my little nook here, you start moving a little bit inland. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I did I was a road trip from California to Florida. My father-in-law has a place in St. Pete's, and we were on the West Coast there in California, and we decided to drive all the way across, and coming down through Florida, man, from Tallahassee.
Oh yeah, don't even talk about the big turn and the panhandle.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you, man. It's you got some really interesting people, man.
Yeah, that's of course my Florida is a coastal Florida, right? So I've never actually physically been in the Panhandle.
Yeah.
I've got like 5 or 6 legend trips that we want to do in the Tallahassee area.
Yeah.
And people are like, "Oh, it's a different
place."
You know what I'm saying? Like it is a very different feel to that East Florida, to that Panhandle thing, and much more southern. Florida's a special place.
It's an interesting. I love. Don't get me wrong. I love Florida. I really do. I love Florida. Like everywhere, it has its its bad points, and you gotta watch certain places. You gotta watch it, but for the most part, I've enjoyed being in Florida. So I
look at it sometimes and I say, is this any weirder than rural New Hampshire, which I lived in?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or is this more backwards in my city mind, coming from Boston, than rural places in Massachusetts or Western Massachusetts that I know? And I roll that around in my mind and go, yeah, it's weirder. So it is a little bit stranger then, but I can only talk to the places I've been to.
So how long did it take you to fully integrate into Florida?
I'm not.
No,
never. No,
still.
no,
You're not from around, are you?
No. I'm not flow grown at all.
Yeah.
And I will be 4 years from this date. I will be packing my moving van, and I will go to my daughter's high school graduation in that truck. And I will give her a big old kiss on the forehead, and I will be like, "Good luck." Although she has said she has no plans to go to college in Florida, and my son already wants to move back to New England. So
yeah. Oh wow.
No, this is not my home at all.
Oh man. Yeah, it's an interesting place, that's for sure. But that's cool though, because I mean, I really I've been there several times, but yeah, I did not know much about the legends. I did not know much about the paranormal aspects, and I knew they were there. It's just I never really had the time to, while being down there to actually look into that stuff, except for the odd time. And like I said,
you have to understand the culture and the mindset to
yeah.
get it, right? So you don't have Revolutionary War ghosts, right? Like you don't have those backstories. You don't have backstories of the Civil War even, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are a few here and there, and they usually touch upon more like forts and stuff like that, as opposed to this battlefield or that battlefield. What you have though, which I've never really been drawn to, so I haven't covered. You have a ton of pirate legends.
I was going to say that, yeah.
And those kind of things, which for some reason, except for one in particular, I've never really been drawn to pirate stories.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a lot of Native American and clash with Native American tales, and I think some of that has to, or the origin or the backstory of this comes from Native American, or it gets traced back to it. So you have a lot of that kind of stuff, and so you just have to understand the context of where you are, and that's part of the beauty of what we do on Tripping on Legends is actually researching the town. What's the history of the town? What's the
And I mean, you look at Florida historically, it's been conquered by the French, the English, the Spanish.
Right.
What else?
And it's been like, hey, do you guys want this? And it's like, no, you guys can have it. It kind of has this part to it. I always talk, there's this great cemetery in Boca Raton, Florida.
Okay.
Which, once again, growing up Italian in New England, Boca Raton had the mystique of paradise, right? It was that was the ultimate goal of every Jewish and Italian person I knew was eventually to make it to Boca, right?
Yeah.
That was, it had this mystique of the promised land. I'm going to retire to Boca, and there's this cemetery there, and I call it, the Boca Raton Cemetery. Very not interesting name.
Yeah.
And it has this story of a screaming man. Right. Okay. And so people have heard this man who sounds like he's crying, and then it becomes a wail, then it becomes a scream. There are actually police reports of the police having to go out to try to figure out who this man is. Right. So whenever I present this story, I'm like, I'm going to tell you the most Florida ghost story of all time. Right. If you're thinking about in your mind, if you think about what Florida is, this is it. Because the cemetery the land was donated, the cemetery was established, and then they dug up every single resident and moved them to build a golf course. Right?
Yeah.
Then they dug up all the graves again and moved them to a different location to build a base, an army base. This is the history of Florida, right?
Yeah.
And then right near there, a man is Boca Raton's becoming really popular. I am going to create these a residential community. He starts digging and he finds Native American bones, right?
Yeah.
This is a story that can only happen in Florida. They don't stop the construction. They don't dig up the bones and donate them to the local college for research.
Yeah.
Instead, he digs up as many bones as he can find. He gets the quote unquote nicest bones, and he builds an amusement park, a roadside attraction amusement park, where you can walk through this mound and
Wow.
look at all of the bones of all of the Native Americans who were buried there.
Crap.
Tell me that is not the perfect setting for a cursed piece of land, right? And then ultimately, and so I tell that story, and everyone's laughing because that's where you think of roadside attractions, golf courses, army bases, and then I say ultimately it comes down to when I went to the cemetery and we're looking around, and what I noticed there were 7 or 8 graves where the man had been buried, and his date, the death date was like 1978, right? And next to him is where his wife is buried, and she was born in 1901, and there's no death date, which essentially means they moved down to Florida to die.
Yeah.
He died. She met another man and is buried someplace else. And how Florida is that to come down for retirement and then ditch your dead husband for another one? And so my theory is that screaming man has nothing to do with his grave being desecrated. It has nothing to do with his bones being turned into an amusement park. His wife is out there somewhere buried with another man.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy.
Or sucking another man's bone.
Yeah, more or less.
Insert Florida man joker. Whatever joke. Yeah.
Well, wow, man, that's 2 hours flew by. Chris, thanks for joining us, man. Thanks for coming back on. Thank you very much for having me. Always enjoy having you on, man. And like I said, it's been a long time, but got to have you back on sooner next time. But let everyone know where they can find you.
Probably the best place to go would be trippingonlegends.com. That's where you can get the show. You can listen to the show wherever you get your podcast. We're even on Spotify now. Or you can go to www.trippingonlegends.com, or really everything kind of filters down, being the old man that I am, to Facebook. And so, facebook.com/trippingonlegends is kind of where everything gets posted. So.
And you're also content editor or something for what is it, South Coast?
Yeah, I don't do that anymore, but I used to be the content director for
That's
Spooky
right.
Southcoast.
I remember that. Oh,
yeah.
so you're not
I'm still administrator of the page, so I sneak my stuff onto their page because they have more traction than I do. But yeah, I don't work for them anymore, although they're still an amazing show.
Okay, cool. I have all the links there in the show notes.
Cool, thank you.
For anyone to go check you out. Chris, take care, my friend, and thanks again. Always a blast.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Take care.
Have a good one,
Chris.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Great, man. Like it's been what?
It's been a long time.
7 years. It's been a long time. So, but no regular show next week. Is it next weekend?
Yeah, next weekend's a long weekend.
Long weekend. But the following Sunday, what is it? The 27th, 28th?
28th, I believe.
28th, we're having Michelle and Amelia on.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun. Always a blast having those two on. So yeah. Until then, guys, take care and thanks for joining us tonight.
Take care.
And thank you, Chris, for joining us as well. Oh, blast. So many stories, man.
I know.
I wish I had that many stories. I mean, I guess I would if I did the research he does. Holy crap.
Yeah, that kind of needs to be necessary, I guess.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have somewhat of a catalog of stories, but not quite that extensive. So, but anyways, take care, everyone. It's been a blast. Until 2 weeks, 28th. Sunday, the 28th. Yep. Take care.
Take care.